Hey, everybody. We're going to be doing Written and Watched today. This is the second one. This is the watched portion for Annihilation. We did the book last week, so go back, listen to that one. If you don't want to, that's fine. We're going to spoil everything here when we talk about the movie Annihilation. And I have again with me Ryan from Up Nerd Podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and say hello to the people out in podcast land?
Hello to the people. We're a podcast it's mostly my wife and I, though we do have people on from time to time or just sort of guest hosts, that kind of thing. I should bring you on at some point, by the way. Anyway, we just sort of talk about, we just sort of nerd out about whatever it is we're interested in at the time. We do have 2 bi-weekly shows. There's Top 3, Bottom 3, which the latest episode of that went up this week. We did Top 3, Bottom 3, where we watched the 3 best episodes and then the 3 worst episodes, sometimes in a different order, whatever. This time we did Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We chose Cagney and Lacey will be the next one of that show, which is interesting. There's a reason for it.
I haven't even thought about that show in years and years.
Yeah, there's a reason for it if you listen to the episode. It's interesting. So there's that, and then there's Fine, You Pick, where I think we've all had a significant other who is not as versed in film or television as we are. And so it's just a matter of one person picks the movie, the other person has to watch it. And the next one coming up for that is actually Warcraft, which this spun out of Annihilation, actually. So we watched Annihilation.
Really? That is a weird crossover.
Well, we watched Annihilation, and then we did Moon. Moon was directed and written by Duncan Jones. Somebody watched Moon and said, hey, this guy can write and direct the Warcraft movie based on a video game franchise, and that seems insane to me. Like, I can't wait to do that because the difference between the two is astounding. I mean, essentially, you watch the film Moon, and then you watch the equivalent of a Marvel movie, essentially. Like, it's crazy to me that again, somebody watched Moon, a film on a $5 million budget, and said, hey, we should tap this guy, give him $250 million on this billion-dollar franchise, and this is what he should do. And it all spun out of Annihilation because Annihilation, the film we're going to talk about today, Alex Garland, $16 million budget. So, I mean, next to nothing in terms of film.
That was Annihilation's budget, was only $16 million?
That's what it cost. It's crazy to me. And it looks fantastic.
It's got Natalie Portman in it, and it's got
Tessa Thompson, Oscar Isaacs. Like, it's got
Jennifer Jason Leigh. Yeah, it's got a cast.
It's got an insane cast. And it's crazy to me that, it was $16 million. Gina Rodriguez is in it as well. Like, it's just Benedict Wong. It's got name after name of people who are big now, and some of whom were big at the time. But $16 million. And it's crazy to me that it even got made in the first place because there was a lot of internal pressure on it. In terms of they thought it was too cerebral and too intelligent for audiences, which is why it only got very limited theatrical release originally. And then it was in other countries, it was released straight to Netflix. Didn't even go to theaters or anything. Netflix picked it up.
I noticed that they were the initial distributor for online streaming for it. And it's not there anymore. You have to pay for it to watch it now, or you own it, or I think it's on Paramount Plus maybe, but I didn't have that one. So, but it's harder to find. Which I didn't realize when we jumped into it, because then I was looking around going, oh wait, where do I, where can I watch this without paying people money that I've already paid money for a couple of times?
Yeah, I don't own a lot of physical media anymore. I try to kind of avoid it because. Right. Yeah, stuff's everywhere now, that sort of thing. This is one of the few, though, I picked up on physical media because I wanted a copy of it. It's a film that I can rewatch, despite the fact that it's very different from the book.
It's very different from the book. And this one I feel like would have great director's commentary, too.
Yeah.
Have you listened to that for this?
A little bit, yeah. It's difficult because, so to just get into the film, I guess.
Yeah, let's do it.
The opening of the film is very different from, so the book we're just dropped immediately into Area X. In the film, it's called The Shimmer, but we open with sequences before The Shimmer. We see Lena teaching at her university. She is still a biologist in this. She has a name. I guess we should mention that. It's Natalie Portman's character is the biologist from the book, named Lena in this. Everybody has a name, which is a big difference.
Yeah,
it's like Cheers, where everybody knows your. Oh, anyway. So
well, they also in the movie. Also, when it opens and she's teaching, she's not just a biologist, she's a cellular biologist. So there's a lot of really cool imagery in this, even early on, of meiosis and mitosis, like cells dividing and splitting. That's really key to them kind of figuring out what's going on in the Shimmer. And this one has a much more overt narrative and arc for a lot of the characters, where the book is it's so in that unreliable narrator space, and because of the reframe in the movie, I think you lose a lot of that unreliable narrator piece. It becomes more of a omniscient narrator film than just the journal.
We do. We also see in this initial sort of sequence, though, that we're still being told the story seemingly through the eyes of the biologist, though, because she is being interrogated by Benedict Wong's character at the organization. I don't think it's named here. I think I'm just going to call it the Southern Reach Organization. That's what it is in the books.
Well, they do name it because they say this used to be the old Southern Reach headquarters when they find the building broken down. So they do call out it as the Southern Reach in a couple of spots. But it's not, like, early on, it's not super obvious. And that shot with Portman sitting in a chair, and she's opposed by 3 people arrayed almost like they're adversarial to her. So you've got Benedict Wong right in front, like towering over her. He's a very large presence in that shot with just giant hazmat uniform on. He looks kind of like Big Hero 6. And then behind him, you've got 2 others flanking him in the same suit. So they're kind of like these, not faceless because they have plastic masks and you can see their face, but they're simulacrums of each other. They're like this exact similar form, which is really interesting when you get into what's happening in the Shimmer with the differentiation of everything. Mm-hmm. So there's this massive homogeneity that Alex Garland is telegraphing right off the bat for the real world, or for the world outside the Shimmer, which he does really well. Yeah,
it becomes really clear as they get into the Shimmer in the book called Area X. But here we know something's gone wrong because she's being interrogated by these antagonistic seemingly forces. But we get a little more backstory here. We see her with her husband. We see her after her presentation, however, that her husband has been missing for a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
So in these flashbacks,
they do a lot of bouncing around in time there, right at the beginning, because we are starting off after everything's happened. We're starting out after the whole movie, and then going back to before the movie, and then going back before that, while also going. Yeah,
which is kind of similar to the books, at least. Which,
that is.
They've kept that aspect of it. But we learned that Lena's husband's been missing for a period of time. She has guilt over that, combined with the fact that she has had, I guess we call it an affair.
Yeah, and they do it in a very interesting way, because in that opening bit, they let one of her coworkers speak the exposition on her husband, because she's about to go home and paint our bedroom, and then she changed it to say the bedroom, because she's trying to avoid going to a party this guy's hosting with his wife and his friends and all these people where they have fun. And he goes, your husband's been away longer than you've been together. You really need to start processing this. We'll have fun. It's a no pressure event. And later in the film, they reveal the affair. And they reveal the affair with them in bed, and then she ends the affair. intimating that her husband found out. So then I wasn't really sure if that happened before or after. I think it happened after, and she's lying that her husband knows.
Yeah, I think it's after and she's lying. I think it's interesting to me that that's how the film essentially decided to depict the fact that their relationship is complicated in a lot of ways. It's sort of it's a very quick way to do what the books were able to do over a period of time. But having said that, obviously the books have the benefit of an internal monologue, which is something you can't really do on film, especially in a limited amount of time as they have here, because you want to kind of establish this before the events that happen inside.
Well, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I think having the affair be the registry on film of the tension between their characters, I think that detracts from how complicated their relationship was, that kind of gets hit in the book really well. And it's hard to kind of portray that. And I feel like an affair is just shorthand for relationship rough, relationship bad. And so it works, but I feel like it robs...
It's complicated.
Yeah. But I feel like it robs some of that depth that I really got in the book, where I felt more connected to her own issues with the relationship and her processing that in tandem with processing what's happening in Area X in the book. Like I really enjoyed that pull, and that's kind of absent a little bit more in this.
I agree 100%. Yeah, this is something I talked about during the Upnerd version of Annihilation. Is I am not a fan of the decision to just sort of have the affair as the explanation for that relationship.
Yeah.
It just feels very out of place. I do like that in a lot of ways that is her impetus for wanting to go in, the feeling of guilt and betrayal. I think it works from that aspect, but in terms of changing and framing the human relationships that are present in the book, it really hurts. Yeah. It's one of the things that if I'm listing issues I have with the movie, that's probably the one that's front and center, not even some of the things we'll get to later on. It's probably my biggest loss, I guess we'll say, from book to film.
I fully agree, and I think that there is that difference in the way the relationship works, because when they show them together prior to his departure to the Shimmer, their relationship seems good. They don't have any portrayal of a distance in it. They're making jokes. They're talking about dishonoring the president and the country because he has to go and she doesn't want him to. Like that whole piece betrays no complexity in the relationship. It seems like a good relationship. And then when he returns, you could probably chalk up some of the weirdness to the affair, but when he returns, we don't know about the affair. So he's just odd. Yeah. And when he comes back and they start talking, he says, "I remember you." She says, "From when?" "From just now. I was outside the door and I saw you and I remembered you." Yeah. He is weird.
Door
they do
was
a really
open.
good job
I came
of making
in.
him uncomfortable. Yeah.
It's
he's
so
kind
odd.
of reciting what just happened, and not... His consciousness is kind of vacuous and immediate with no second layer reflection. It's just thing happened.
And in the book, this was all alluded to, that these sequences happen, but here we see it. I think it's done to great effect here. It's done really well. Oscar Isaacs portrays it well. He has no clue what's happened in the expedition. He has no memory of the Shimmer. He has no memory of his squad mates. He has no memory, certainly no memory of before. There's absolutely nothing sort of there. He is, in many ways, just an empty sort of shell with impressions of Kane. Sergeant Kane is the name we're given for the husband.
And I think this gets to something that you mentioned, and I hadn't realized until like we watched it, you talked about it, and I read some stuff on it. But Alex Garland's idea that this movie is not a direct adaptation of the book. It's like a fever dream version of the story that the book is telling. It's just told in a totally different way, which if you release some of the pressure of the book, it's really weird because I think two things happen, right? So if you release some of the pressure of reading the book, it's a whole different movie and it's a whole different experience. But having not read the book the first time I saw it, reading the book and coming back and watching it again, it is a very different movie.
Oh, yeah.
It has so much different happening in the structure and the realization of what's going on and how they're interacting. And you get totally different sets of information from the book and the movie. So it reinforces almost the unreliable narrator aspect of the book, while at the same time giving you a different possible thing that actually happened, which is kind of cool for a movie and a book to be able to pair like that.
It's fascinating to me. The decisions made, so to continue on, the decisions made fascinate me. And so beyond this, we see sort of Lena wants to be part of the expedition. She encounters Ventress, and this is all after her husband has suddenly fallen ill. We don't know why. Their ambulance gets surrounded. They get picked up by the Southern Reach organization. And
that is a really good dark government scene, too. Like, it's a nice inciting incident to have Oscar Isaac's Zane character show back up, come into the house. They're I think they're together like maybe 48 hours before he has a medical issue. Call an ambulance. The ambulance gets attacked and swarmed by military guys with guns who pull him out. They take them to the Southern Reach, split them up. They dope her to bring her in. So you have this thing that's kind of like an abduction. Well, it is an abduction. They're fully abducting them. Yeah. And then go on with the Triss stuff. I just wanted to point out that it's a really cool, inciting incident to expose the Southern Reach. Because prior to this, there's no discussion of the Southern Reach.
No, yeah. Yeah, and then up there are conversations between Lena and her future squad mates. Anya, Shepard, Radek, Ventress, and Lena are the five.
Yeah, I had a hard time keeping them straight name-wise because they're
the
such
biologist,
odd names.
The anthropologist, the psychologist.
Yeah, it's much easier to hold on to the job titles than the names, to be honest. Like that
person who gets fed to bear, person who becomes bear, person who. Oh, anyway, it's interesting. So. Whatever, we get through that, and then we go into the Shimmer, at which point the film changes significantly. I also want to point out that it's something my wife pointed out when we watched, but the sequences before the Shimmer filmed very differently and very much darker. It's almost as if there's sort of a sheen over everything outside of it, which, I mean, it's obviously intentional, but the film gets... honestly much easier to watch after
it's gorgeous.
They get within the Shimmer. It's beautiful.
Yeah, the way they film the Shimmer, the way the light comes in, the way that the plant life is, just the colors are so saturated and rich, and it feels like do you remember What Dreams May Come? And he's walking around in all the paintings and stuff. It felt like that. It felt very painterly.
It feels like almost a filter from that film almost was painted over it. And it's definitely what came to mind when I was watching it initially way back when. And
it's if you have an OLED TV, if you have a 4K monitor somewhere, it's one of those movies that really does the newer technology a favor in showing off just this massive swath of color. It hits everything in the Rec 709 color space. It's just there. The blacks disappear and it makes the light so bright. There's parts of it that look pastoral and there's parts of it that look like an end times painting. It's amazingly well done and kind of put together. A lot of it's done with CG, but it's just so breathtakingly gorgeous. It's fantastic to watch.
So we enter the Shimmer, Area X, whatever you want to call it. Area X, by the way, probably the cooler name. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I wonder what... I get some of the things in change of verbiage, but it is interesting because Area X in the book is so clearly like, oh, there's something happening there. It's expanding. And in the movie, they're so focused on it's the shimmer and it makes things shimmer. The glowing stuff, her glowing, is less referenced but present in the book. And then Annihilation isn't... Like, the psychologist doesn't have control words in this.
No, there's only allusions to them being hypnotized at all, in fact. So, I mean, the hypnosis... It comes in the start, in that they sort of awaken and they're at base camp and they've already spent 3 to 4 days there. At which point, they decide to move on. But yeah, it's really only alluded to a little bit.
And I think that lack too makes it so that they had to have a different drive to put in between the characters, which they end up using. Lena's hiding that she's there because her husband came out of the shimmer, right? So that becomes the thing that she's quote unquote lying about. And that becomes the wedge that drives people apart. Instead of in the text where the psychologist is almost a nefarious character, but just in the sense that she has the control and the power, and the breaking of that power is what drives the wedge into the group. And it's still the biologist's fault. But it's interesting that they had to find a different way to kind of wedge them apart. When I really, especially with Jennifer Jason Leigh playing the character, I mean, if you've probably seen her in The Hateful Eight, is a great performance by her when she's on her way to get hung. But she has that kind of weirdness and kind of sinister feel, but she's not sinister in this. It's a very different story for the psychologist and the biologist relationship-wise than it is in the text.
That also extends to the name of it, too, though. I mean, in the books, Annihilation is the code word to, I guess the term the kids use is unalive.
Unalive,
yourself.
Yep.
In the books, here, Annihilation is more everybody on this mission has some form of self-destruction within them. And it's a reference to that. Everyone has sort of self-destructive tendencies in this group. Everybody has something they're getting away from or moving towards with it. And you mentioned the psychologist, for example, she has terminal cancer. She is not expecting to survive very much longer. And that's her reason for going in. Lena is going in after a memory at this point, with her husband coming out as a shell or something different. We have another character who, it turns out, was suicidal. We have, it's a mix of everything with them. We have another one who suffered addiction. It's all forms of self-destruction.
Yeah, and the psychologist, Ventress, has that monologue at the end where she's, and we're going to jump around, it's all spoiled anyway, but at the end when they're back at the lighthouse, it's still the point at which she's saying annihilation over and over, but she's saying it as she's being annihilated and talking about how everything goes back to everything and the energy is all the same. Like, the movie has a much more transcendental message in it than I feel like the book did. The book had a through line and an ending that was hopeful because she's still chasing this idea and memory of her husband, but it didn't teach the reader the kind of I don't know what to call it. It's like this almost philosophy of being one with everything that it kind of rolls around to.
The film is more interested in the concept of change of Area X, which the book, certainly that is a feature within it. We learn about, in the book, we learn about the previous expedition. We eventually learn that sort of the 11th psychologist has become something else in there. Yeah. And our main character is hopeful that her husband has maybe become something else, or at least she sort of feels his presence at some points. And yeah, the film instead is just, it's very focused on those change aspects, to the point that, you know, they now they find the previous camp, and they discover a video, and they discover that the previous expedition was changing. And we get one thing that I find the film does is ideas that were mentioned in the book or are mentioned at some point. So, for example, somebody eats something in one of the books and they feel like something's slithering in them. Well, the film shows us that. Yeah. And it shows us that in graphic detail. We see a video from the previous expedition, and one of the members doesn't feel right, and they end up cutting him open on film, and his insides are kind of moving around. And
notably, it's Kane who cuts him open. Like, Kane has a pretty big role in the videos and the stuff. So as Natalie's they're all dealing with this weirdness. Natalie's character is Lena's seeing her husband go mad, and other people in the group are denying what they've seen. But there's some really good body horror in this. So know that if you're squeamish, this is not really a good squeamish people movie. Between some of the creatures, the defleshed bear who has no skin on his skull, the crocodile's pretty cool, or the alligator's pretty cool. But there's several parts in this that are just really troubling to look at, but also oddly compelling. And that's one of them, is when they cut it open and there's it looks like eels coiling over each other.
Just eels or snakes or something just moving around in there.
Kane gets creepy. He reaches his hand and he's pulling it out, like he's taking joy in.
Yeah, well, everybody's laughing at certain points during this. You know, it just seems like a campfire exercise to hack open one of your comrades. And we actually see the after effects of it with, I don't even know how to explain it. You mentioned the body horror aspects. We see the after effects of, it's pretty clearly that member. And they're sort of against the wall. It's covered in different lichen and different plants.
So it's
fauna.
It's the deep end of a pool, which I think is interesting too. So when they were filming it, you couldn't really tell where they were at. But when they come into the old area of the Southern Reach, there's a pool that's like a diving pool or something. So it's super deep, maybe 12 feet. And at the deep end of the pool, against the tile wall, so in this kind of pristine space, right, is just this. It's worth looking at a picture of it, at least online, if you're listening to this and going and taking a look, because the body's expanded as it's being carried by moss and lichen and things that are growing out of it, while at the same time kind of manifesting all these different colors and remnants of a person that are part of the body of a larger mass against the wall that's vegetative. It is very strange. It's cool looking.
The bones have sort of been, and the bones have sort of been moved all over the place. You know, the jawline is completely shifted, and it's just, it's very odd and oddly beautiful. Yeah. There's a weird sort of beauty to this film, and I think that's why it stays with you, including the creature design, which you mentioned the alligator is the first creature they encounter. The alligator looks normal, but it's our first sense that something's off because it has serrated shark-like teeth.
And it has rows and rows of teeth, going back like a shark does. And it's also, its coloration is super weird. It's pinkish, whitish, instead of being like a big green alligator.
More of a green, more of what we think of,
Yeah, it's cool looking. And it takes a lot of bullets to kill the thing.
Yeah. And so, the next one they encounter is something grabs Shepard from camp and drags it off. This is our first encounter with the bear, not to be confused with the excellent television series that we did an episode about. But it drags her off, and now we're down a member. And suddenly we get sort of one of the scenes from the book. By the way, they went in with 5 women here. It's only 4 women in the book. The linguist in the books just sort of up and disappears. We're told that they don't go in, but unreliable narrator, not to mention unreliable psychologist, who knows. Yeah. But we went from 5 women to 4, which, by the way, it's good we're doing this now, because in a film starring 5 women, it probably won't be allowed in your country soon. Anyway.
Ouch. Oh, by the way, everybody, this film does pass the Bechdel test. So they do talk about things beside boys, and they talk to each other. So this is, if you're into that, this does pass the Bechdel test.
Yeah. Which is a very low bar that so many movies that I've done do not pass. Anyway.
If you don't know what the Bechdel test is, there's a feminist cartoonist who made a joke, but it became a thing to talk about in film circles. And she was regarding that she'd only watch films if it had more than one woman in a prominent role. And when the women talk to each other, they have to talk about something other than men. So they can't just be rehashing what relationships they have with the guys in the movie.
And it's such a low bar.
It's a very low bar.
So many films and television shows don't meet it. So
you know what, a good one to call out that passes the Bechdel test, and I think most of the listeners think is a great movie, I do too, is Alien. Yeah. And one of the big reasons Alien passes the Bechdel test is because the original script was written without gender in mind. Every character could be cast as anybody.
Well, in fact, we get a trans woman in Alien, which is one of the first times I can ever remember any of that. So in this movie, though, so move on.
We're bird walking.
It's fine. Oh God, I will talk about Alien forever. They head out at this point. There's the discussion, much like from the books, only with an extra member here, about whether or not to go on. Lena is sort of, in a lot of ways, a deciding vote. This is, by the way, despite the fact it's 2 against 2, but whatever. Wants to go on to the lighthouse. And so they head out. We see a sort of village.
We should call that out too. That's much different in the book. In the book, they talk about how the shimmer started, and they go, it's a meteor from space that hit the lighthouse. The lighthouse is the origin. It's consistently growing outward from there. And that's explicit in the movie. They show it. They show the meteor hit.
Yeah, the film 100% makes it clear what causes it. In the books, it's never 100% clear. There is an inciting event in the books that I don't want to describe too much. It is definitely not a meteor. But Area X in the books existed long before any inciting event. In the film, it seems pretty clear that, you're right. And we see the meteor at the start as the music sort of plays over the logos and everything. The meteor hammers the lighthouse. You're right. We also will note at this point, they head to the village, which is a scene from the books. There's no tower or tunnel. The tunnel is sort of, there's a bit of a tunnel. It is merged with the lighthouse when we get there. Yeah. But they head straight to the village here, and they discover that there's a lot of people-looking plants there, and they are examined. And then another instance occurs with them examining the biology of things around them, that things are replicating. We get our discussion here that signals are not leaving the shimmer. They are being bounced back and refracted within the shimmer, and that's why everything seems to share the same sort of DNA.
Yeah, so I think that's something that we hit on right here that's actually the most overt discussion we have of what's actually happening inside of the shimmer, and that whole idea of refraction, and the idea that they figure it out through the radio waves and looking at the light, because the light coming in, part of the reason it looks so painterly is that the light coming in is refracted like it would be going through water or something. And so the same thing is happening to everything inside of the shimmer, including their own DNA is being refracted. And you have the biologist looking at her cells, and this is the first time we see like a glow to the cells, and they're starting to be different. But then they get into trying to be too overt about it. And the reason I think that is because they pull up the idea of Hox genes, and that the Hox genes are guiding the plant to be in a human form. But Hox genes are not a specifically human gene pattern. They're actually in vertebrate animals. So any vertebrate animal has a set of Hox genes that goes, okay, now you're going to put an arm out, and now you're going to put, that goes on both sides, and now here's some space for guts, and here's the other legs. So it does ascribe the body pattern, but you have Hox genes in bugs that are slightly different, and you have them in, like if you think of a centipede or a bee, they have Hox genes. They're just set up different. And so for the Hox genes to specifically make people trees, it's one of those things where if you know just a little bit too much, you start going, well, where are the bee trees? And where are the fish trees? And, it's Hox genes make a lot of different stuff and not just people. And there's been a lot more other stuff in the Shimmer than people.
Yeah. Science doesn't quite check out on this one.
Yeah, and it's fun because they are doing neat stuff. Like early on when she's teaching her class, she mentions that they're going to be studying cancer cells because they replicate almost endlessly. And the cells she's talking about on stage, she's like, yeah, these were from the cancer of a 30-something-year-old woman. And I go, I'll bet it was Henrietta Lacks. And then like 45 minutes later, an hour later, they have a flashback to her in bed reading The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I'm like, oh, guys, you're really obvious in that you read a couple of basic texts and went, yeah, we're good. So I think they did have a science advisor, but I don't think it was a geneticist. I think it was more likely a general biologist, maybe like undergrad biology degree. But it's something to call out and something that will pop in if you've done much work in biology or gene stuff. You're gonna see a couple things that you'll go, okay. I think it's worth letting it slide for the film because they do have so much weird things going on that you can still let it. I was able to let it be, and it didn't throw me out. I just kind of had that moment where I'm like, well, okay, well, she doesn't quite. I'm going to pretend in my mind that she doesn't quite understand Hox genes instead of blaming it entirely on the world and the film.
There you go. So Anya goes to Crazy Town at this point, and kidnaps everybody. You're talking about a film with women. The police are coming for you now.
You can hear that. I apologize. I'm like fine. 2 streets off. I'm 2 streets off from the main drag, and so
I knew this would happen to you eventually because you're talking about books. They're gonna get banned while you're doing them.
Oh man, we should do a banned book series on here. Oh, they're on my street.
See,
they're not stopping here though. I'm okay. They went by. They don't know where I'm at yet.
So, Anya Thorensen, who's Gina Rodriguez's character, goes to Cuckoo Town at this point, guilty about Shepard, the other character who got dragged off earlier by something we didn't see. We see it this time. I do want to point out something, though, that my wife noticed that I hadn't initially. Now I can't unsee it at all. The house that Rodriguez's character takes them to and they are captured in, the house is a 1-to-1 reproduction of Lena's house.
Oh, weird. I did not know that.
It is an intentional representation that Area X is copying things from the outside world. And it's fascinating to me. It's one of those touches in the film. The other one, and I'm just going to get to it now, the other one is if you pay attention to characters' tattoos, most notably like Josie's and some of the others, they appear on other people, and their tattoos become mimicked on the same person on different sides as well. And most notably with an Ouroboros, the 8 for infinity, whatever you want to call it, tattoo that
the
appears.
Snake eating its own tail.
Yeah, and it's touches like that make me love this film that much more. And it sets it apart from the book, but it's just little things like that just kind of push it over the edge are why I love both it and I love the book.
That attention to detail and that kind of structuring, I think Alex Garland's really good at just from a filmmaking point of view. Like his earliest credit's 28 Days Later. Was that his first film? I
believe so. I'd have to look it up, but I mean,
But there's a lot of things in there that he's really good at in constructing a zombie world, and he does a really good job at maintaining the rules inside of that construct, that story that he's telling. And so that makes total sense that he'd be aware of that. I totally missed the house and the tattoos, so now I have another reason to go watch it.
Yeah, I recommend it because when you start noticing that stuff, it becomes a joy. The other stuff that is a joy, and Alex Garland is terrific with in here, is the creature design, because we see the bear, which is very much the moaning creature from the book.
Yeah. Yes.
And to the point that it is actually a very good representation of it, minus 1 point. The book, we finally get a clear description of it in the 3rd book. And I don't want to give away too much, but it's missing one small but prominent feature, but still, it's very good. And there's nice touches throughout it, because you can see the human-shaped faces and things on the bear, in particular on its left side during this, and it's very accurate to both the book and to, it's so creepy. The fact that it speaks mimicking Shepard's cries. It's so well done. It even starts with, it's way far off and you hear it and it sounds like Shepard's calling. And they're like, oh my gosh, she's alive. Mm-hmm. And they're like, Lena's like, no. And Triss is like, no. And the others are, no, I can hear her. And then when the bear is actually in and creeping around him and kind of mumbling with Shepard's voice, you're like, oh. And it repeats the help me at one point, just elongated, because it leaves its mouth open, and it's so creepy.
It's so creepy. This is another piece where if you're squeamish at all, you're not going to enjoy the sequence, because the bear's skull is missing most of its fur and flesh, and is just bone on the upper part, and then jaw has flesh and tongue and mouth.
Yeah.
But the violence in the scene is extremely cruel. It is extremely rapid and extremely red in tooth and claw nature. Just nope, and now you're done. Yeah. It's a very aggressive scene.
It's not a particularly gory film, I find, with the exception of the sequence we described earlier where Kane goes to knife down on his buddy. But I mean, aside from that, for the most part, it's not. The violence is very visceral, you're right. Yeah. And it's very quick. But I don't know, it didn't feel like a gore related film. I mean, if you were to continue Written and Watched and you did a lot of horror books, there's a lot of horror films that have fallen into what I term, and the term I copy, I should say, is torture porn, where they have a lot of gore and viscera to frankly make up for an inability to do psychological horror. This film does psychological and creature horror so well. The psychological and creature horror of everything is so much better in this movie than even most horror films.
I think about it and like what kind of horror I'd call it, and it's really strange because it doesn't have the structure of any kind of a classic horror film. It's not a jump scare movie, it's not a thriller. It just sits in this pocket of unease, and then that unease stays with you and you carry it around for a little while.
It feels more like Alien than anything else, though. For me at least, in terms of how I feel while I'm watching it. And we get to this sequence. They lose some more members. We lose Anya in this sequence. The psychiatrist leaves and is gone for the rest. We're left with just Lena and Tessa Thompson's character. And I love this sequence afterwards because it is one of the first, or one of the few kind of references directly to the book, because Josie Radek is Thompson's character. Radek has a conversation the next morning with Lena, and she kind of essentially just nopes out of the movie. It's kind of like
she walks away.
Ventress wants to. I can't remember the exact line. It's one of them wants to fight it, and the other one wants to, explore it and understand it. And Radek decides, I don't want either of those things. She's just seen somebody die violently. She knows that Shepard died violently. She doesn't really want that. And she just decides, what, the heck with it. But what I appreciate, again, in the nice touches, the sort of moss we saw earlier on the people starts growing, and she starts sort of glowing more and more, and it's very subtle. Like, you can miss it if you're not paying attention, or if you're just really invested in what's being said and kind of the scene. And she walks off at this point and ends up presumably becoming one of those kind of statues of people made out of plant.
Yeah, she just kind of, instead of fighting it or studying it, so I guess the thing is fight it, know it, or be it, and she decides to be it.
Yeah.
She goes full Nike. She just does it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because, if you were to liken this to just strictly speaking a horror film, we don't see that very often.
Yeah.
Usually it's one or the other.
Where you just give up to the monster.
Yeah, and just...
Well, I think that also calls into question whether you're going to define this as a monster, whether you're going to define it as something with malicious intent or sinister motives, or is it just an otherness that we don't understand? And that's where I kind of keep thinking about this in terms of Lovecraft, is that there's this cosmic, ununderstandable, unknowable motivation to the otherness that is disquieting, because you can't like pull apart and go, okay, well it's trying to do X, Y, Z. What's it trying to do? And you go, I'm not really sure. Like, I have some idea with the Kane person that came back and then how they kind of end it. Mm-hmm. Like, you start to get an idea, but I don't think I could describe the motivations of the Shimmer.
No, it's even
like that'd be a challenge for me.
It feels even more loose here than in the book. And here, Lena now journeys to the lighthouse. She goes inside.
Oh, and it's a weird walk.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
it is
everything's
a weird
kind
walk. There's all kinds of stuff as she gets closer to the lighthouse where there are like crystallized trees. And there's a set of bones on the beach that are rib cages stacked in or arranged in a pattern, and then skulls in a pattern. And it's just this strange, very conscious placing of bones that
the bones
I don't think ever gets explained.
Yeah, the bones are from the book, but what's interesting here is they're not from the first book.
And okay. I was going to say, I don't remember them.
No, it's interesting to me that Alex Garland or somebody here.
Garland
insisted. He said he's
I thought he only read the first
books.
book once. Yeah.
Somebody on their team has to have read further, or they got a lot of guesses right. Because there are elements of further books in this movie, which is really interesting to me. And again, it could just
somebody
be
on the production
right.
team.
Yeah.
No, I feel like somebody on the production team probably had a soft thumb on the scale on that one. Because that's the other thing that I was thinking about while I was watching this. Because I know that Garland made a bunch of different choices than what happens in the book. So does that mean we won't get any other film adaptations? Like, did the movie studio, at $19 million, probably not, but did the movie studio make this one going, oh, eventually we might be able to adapt?
No, there was never an intention to make a sequel. And
which I think actually gives it a nice departure from a lot of other stuff, where instead of going, oh yeah, we have to plan for everything, it just goes, no, this movie is this movie.
There's no post-credit sequence with the characters from the second book getting together.
There is not.
Eating shawarma and saying, like, I'm here to form a team.
Yeah.
We call ourselves the Reach, Southern Reach. No, anyway. So, I mean, they go to the lighthouse here. Lena watches a video taken of Kane and Kane.
Yeah.
He speaks to somebody off camera initially. We eventually find out that he's speaking to another Kane. He doesn't really understand who he is or how he fits into this, and he ends up using a white phosphorus grenade on himself, as one does.
The video is really interesting because when she's watching the video, they play it full screen for you, and it's the same journey she just did. But what makes it really compelling is that a lot of the stuff that you saw from a third-person camera looking back at Lena making the journey is now from first person perspective coming the other way. So you see everything that you've just seen really fast from the other direction. And it's the first time you see like the layout of the bones clearly. It's the first time you kind of see the openings into the lighthouse. And that change in perspective was a really effective kind of retelling and reframing, and fits into this whole double person thing with Kane.
Yeah.
And it's super, super creepy when he's holding the phosphorus grenade and kind of going over that he doesn't know who he is, what he was,
talking
what he
to
will
himself.
Be. Yeah, literally.
In a well-filmed scene as well, too. And Oscar Isaacs, unsurprisingly, is a good actor.
Yeah.
Surprise there. Big shocker, everybody in this is a great actor or actress.
Well, this is his second movie with Alex Garland, right? Didn't Alex Garland do Ex Machina too?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
At this point, that's what he's most known for. At this point in his career, obviously now he's gone on. He's done Civil War, which was a huge hit, and others. So here is she watches the video. This is the only instance we get to a tunnel at all, because she then goes down through the hole that the meteorite created. Yeah. And she finds Ventress hanging out down there, who has also gone to Kooky Town. But we get a discussion about, and you brought it up earlier, it's a long discussion about what becomes, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's a discussion that invariably is about change, and it's a discussion.
Okay, I think the best way to think about it is when listening to that discussion, it sounds like what people think they sound like when they're on mushrooms or LSD, but it's actually communicated very well instead of being the kind of the weird manic. If you've ever hung out with people or been a babysitter when they're on drugs, they're having these transcendental experiences that they can't explain to you, but they think they are. In this case with Triss, I think that is a very accurate monologue of what they think they're saying when they're that high. And it's a very good kind of transcendental monologue about being and becoming, like you were talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because, this is largely, frankly, our replacement to Where Lies the Strangling Fruit, et cetera, et cetera, the writings of the Crawler in the book. And it still sort of works because, you can infer certain meaning from some of the sentences and some of the things spoken. And largely, it works as a substitute as she becomes something else. And we get a heavy CGI sequence here, and she becomes what is the film's interpretation of the Crawler, which is interesting because Vandermeer has said this is one of the more accurate ones, despite the fact it doesn't crawl. So obviously that part is kind of out, but it becomes
I think that in watching it and in watching this Crawler, because I was watching the movie and I'm like, I don't remember anything being identified as the Crawler in the movie. And so I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, when I first saw the body on the wall of the pool, I'm like, wait, is that the
That's what I thought.
That can't be.
That's what I thought initially.
Because it does have the face on it, and you kind of get that it's a whole bunch of things that grew together, and it's got the legs but no legs. It fits some of those descriptions. But then when you see the actual Crawler, I think that the benefit of doing it the way that they did is it is as difficult to describe and even watch as the actual Crawler was to read about, where you come out the end of the passage on the Crawler in the text, not really able to hold on to one thing in your mind. And on screen, this effect that they did, it's such that the only thing that's constant is the void in the middle of the Crawler. Everything else on it is moving and in these patterns, and it's shifting. Yeah.
And even the final interpretation of what it becomes. So it eventually forms a copy of Lena that when she climbs out of the hole, mimics her movements. But I just wanted to mention that in the books, there is a brief description of that exact thing. She, at one point when she's sort of blinking and it's the crawler is blinking out of existence, she sees something that's mimicking her movements one to one. And it's interesting again that that's another thing that they kind of got right, but it's very different than the book.
Yeah.
It's another one of those choices that was fascinating to me. And to do it in real life, by the way, they hired a professional dancer to mimic Natalie Portman's movements one to one as best they can.
When watching it, I thought that they had recorded her movements and just put them onto the simulacrum kind of thing.
So did I, but no, it's a person. They hired somebody, and they mimic the movements. It's
interesting,
very fascinating to me.
To point out, this is something that I think is very unclear in the book, but is very obvious in the movie, and that's that when she's staring into the depths of the crawler, a drop of blood falls forward into the crawler from her eye. So there's definitely a DNA being taken and sampled from her to create this simulacrum of her. And in the book, and you may know more having read the books after this, but in the book, I wasn't sure if the husband that came back and then the people that came back and then died, I didn't think they were necessarily clones. I think they were the transformed entity of the individual. And she's starting to do that towards the end of the book when she goes after her husband and is going to keep going in his direction. I didn't think that they were full clones sent out. I thought they were full replacements of the original cells and person structure. Does that make sense? And that might be a wrong read, but that's what I took out from it.
It does, but I don't know that that's ever really answered. They're referred to as doppelgangers in the book, and they are referred to as such from that first book as well. I'm not spoiling anything there.
Okay.
The process by which they are created is described in so many different unknowable, weird ways and weird things happening. To be blunt, there's everything from somebody hearing a pop and feeling as though they went through a portal for just a second, to somebody just walking around running into another version of themselves. So it's never made clear, as with pretty much everything else. It's one of those unknowables. And you're right, the movie, I think, does a better job of making it clear, which... that can be good or bad, depending on your interpretation. I feel like it's fairly spelled out by this point in the film. They've talked a lot about cells reproducing. They've talked a lot about the nature of cells in general. So I don't know that it was entirely necessary, but I'm perfectly fine with, that sequence and how it's done. And on $16 million, too, I want to mention the CGI and everything. It looks fantastic. You mentioned you thought that the double, Selena ends up shooting at the thing. It doesn't seem to do anything. She goes up and it's there, and it's copying all of her movements one to one, although it won't let her get to the door. And we get the sequence that is described in the book of her kind of being crushed against something and passing out. But here... I just wanted to mention, $16 million, you thought it was potentially they had sort of scanned Natalie Portman and sort of created something in computer generation. They didn't, but it looks fantastic, but it also still looks alien.
Yeah, it looks very alien. It's very strange.
It's such a good job, and it is so creepy to watch the movements being mimicked on, one to one. I tried to sort of do it with my hand. It's almost that same sort of feeling, though, of seeing yourself move somewhere and another place.
And at the earlier stages, like at this point when she's crushed against the door, when she comes up from the hole from the meteor, it's not her yet. It's taller than her. It has kind of this almost alien stretchiness to its thin limbs. And as the scene progresses and as the stuff happens through it, it becomes more and more her. So it's this really strange copying her to become her. And it's that, again, the motivation behind that, is it sinister or is that just what it does? And it feels like it's just what it does and not sinister, but it comes across as horrific and kind of just so disturbing to engage with.
And she's able to hand it a phosphorus grenade, another one of Kane's that was remaining. And seemingly this process destroys Area X. And I wanted to
How do you feel about that?
So, all right. Now we're getting into the ending.
Yeah, this is something that I found problematic, is that
what is your interpretation of the ending? So at the end, she hugs Kane.
Okay, so you're talking about the very end. Okay, Kane. No, just
in general though, because at the very end of the film, she hugs Kane. Her eyes shift, and so does his. It's still pretty clearly not Kane. Obviously, it is the whatever emerged, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about overall, what is your interpretation of the destruction of Area X? Because this is where everything varies. And I thought that, oddly enough, Jeff Vandermeer has one of the most interesting theories about it. But I mean, what was your interpretation? And I'll give mine.
In the way that I read it, I didn't think that the white phosphorus grenade was enough to burn down the whole of the shimmer. I think that the way that it looks is much more akin to the way that Ventress looked when she was becoming. And so because there's that similarity in the way it looked, I felt like the shimmer and whatever consciousness is in the shimmer realized that to continue, it needed to pretend to die. So in my reading of the ending, the shimmer allows itself to be perceived as destroyed, but it is not, because both Kane and Lena, if we go to where Lena's narrating all this and says, it was destroyed, I used the phosphorus grenade, and they ask her, they say, so it was alien. Do you think it was alien? And she's not sure on that question. And I think her lack of surety on that question and her description of what happens is the one point where I truly went, oh yeah, this is all allowing for unreliable narrator. So maybe the one that came out isn't the one that went in, and she went out just like Kane did. Not being handed a grenade, but sitting with a grenade and letting the doppelganger out because she was so lost on who she was. That's kind of where I took it. I don't believe that's the only interpretation at all. I don't think that's conclusive, but that was my read on it, was the shimmer allowed itself to be perceived as destroyed so it could continue to exist in Lena and Kane until it finds a new lighthouse.
I don't like this recording anymore. Your interpretation's smarter than mine. No, I mean, mine initially when I watched it was simply that the shimmer was destroyed, but in the act of it, or in the act of everything that went beforehand, is that everything that existed within it was indefinitely changed, or was infinitely changed, and is no longer the same. As for the continuation of the shimmer in any form, I thought that was the end of it. That's my interpretation. Vandermeer's interpretation is...
So then wait, let me ask you a question on your interpretation then, is what do you think about Lena and Kane not being sure who they are? Because she asks him, are you Kane? And he goes, I don't know.
My interpretation of that is
no
Kane,
answer.
Yeah, Kane is the doppelganger. Lena is the original, but she has been so changed by it, she's unsure of herself at this point. And we don't know how far that change extends.
Yeah.
Vandermeer's interpretation is fascinating, which is that Area X and the shimmer weren't destroyed at all. All that happened was the barrier was destroyed, and Area X is now the entire planet.
Ooh, I just got a little chill.
And yeah, and I love that interpretation. And that everything is now changing, and everyone, whether they know it or not, has changed. We simply have two characters that were closer to that metamorphosis, and so it's taken hold much more rapidly.
Interesting.
it also accounts for why the Southern Reach group would be in full hazmat outfits at this point, as if they don't know what's happened and are worried about something affecting them, not just the presence of Lena. So I don't know. It's interesting to me. I love how open this is combined with how open the book is. I commented on the previous episode that what is an adaptation? What makes something a good adaptation of Lord of the Rings or Annihilation or The Expanse or whatever? And in this case, I feel like they nailed most of the feelings I had from the book. We commented that I think some of the interpersonal stuff is very much missing from the film. I think that's an aspect that never really gets nailed, despite frankly a more interesting character in Radek than we had for the others, the surveyor and the anthropologist. But
I agree. I think it's a fantastic adaptation, and I think that there's so much to be said for that. It is a spiritual adaptation and not a literal adaptation, and that made it a better adaptation because of the content of the original text.
I don't know that I would want to see a literal adaptation of this. I don't know that would work in any form.
So I was thinking about that specific problem, and coming into the film, I'm like, okay, I remember it from, I probably saw it 4 or 5 years ago the first time, and then coming to it from the text, I'm like, what book has an unreliable narrator and has been successfully translated to screen? And I could only think of one. Do you know which one I'm going to say?
I don't have a clue. Where are you going to go?
Fight Club.
Oh, that's true.
Fight Club is the only book with an unreliable narrator that pulls it off. Because the text is what is on screen. It is amazing how true that is to the original text. And they're able to pull it off in the film. But I couldn't think of any others. The others that have really good unreliable narrators, though, is like The Usual Suspects is very good because you're watching him make up this whole story. It's, it's a challenge to kind of adapt that kind of stuff. And in the way this was adapted, it's really good. It's a very, very strong adaptation because it is okay with being different than the text.
And you also have the added degree of difficulty because, it's largely cosmic horror. It's very sort of psychological horror to it as well, too. And you've got additional things with if the creature design, for example, is not great. And the creature design in this absolutely stands out. These are some of the most interesting designs I've ever seen put to screen that really just stick with me.
And to the point where there's creature designs that aren't the adversarial creatures. Besides the crocodile and the bear, you have the strange deer whose horns are they're gorgeous. They're these thin gazelle-like deer, but their horns are tree branches with flowers on them, almost like cherry blossoms.
Yeah,
and they're gorgeously designed creatures.
The flora and the fauna in general too. The sort of statues of people as fauna are just. It's breathtaking. It's something that, if I close my eyes, I can picture instantly again. And not a lot of movies nowadays necessarily stick with you, I think, in terms of their design and how they're filmed. This is one of them.
Well, I think this speaks really to that Alex Garland had a hold on the whole thing. Like at $19 million, you're really able to do that. Where if you do a larger budget movie, you're not.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to hold the control and make sure you have that all the way through. And I think that speaks to it. I also think that your mention of Alex Garland's take on the shimmer being everywhere is really interesting when you start thinking about like how we don't really know how like our gut biome works. We know that it's bad to not have it. We don't really understand how all the bacteria that are on our skin and in our eyes fully interact with us. And then we have parts of our cell that used to be outside of our cell. I think of mitochondrial DNA, right? The powerhouse of the cell. Yeah. But those are all from your mother's lineage. Like you don't have any of your dad's mitochondrial DNA. And because of that, you can trace a mitochondrial Eve, the first thing that incorporated mitochondria into their cells. I mean, it's just, that's very alien and very creepy too, is the way that we are kind of the result of stuff breaking through and causing us to be able to be.
And that's another way I feel like the film has captured the book. There's about 20 different avenues you could examine the film from. And I feel like the book, there's that same sort of number. You could look at it from a number of different standpoints. You can even look at it from a number of different genre standpoints and come up with different answers each time too. It's really fun to me what they've done. I consider them separate. I don't necessarily consider one, like, if somebody tells me, oh yeah, I watched the movie, is the book like that? The answer to that is kind of no. You know? And yet if the same person asks me, well, is it? Yeah, exactly. And if the same person asks me, is it a good adaptation then? I would say absolutely yes.
Yeah.
You know, it's weird.
It's a striking piece for sure. It was fantastic to watch and kind of go down that and have a lot of the thoughts that we're talking about now. I think I had them but hadn't really digested them. It's definitely a movie that if you were to go see it on like a first date, you would know right away how long you're going to be together based on the conversation you have after the film.
Yeah.
So if you're wondering about somebody that you've only been on a date or two with, be like, you know what? Let's watch this weird movie. It's called Annihilation. There's some creepy, weird parts in it, but then afterwards, we're gonna have a bottle of wine and talk all the way through it.
Yeah,
I think you'll be in a really good position.
If they go, that was boring, and I fell asleep, then they're not for me anyway.
Yeah, that's not my connect.
See you around, lady. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Check,
I guess
please.
you didn't pass the Annihilation test.
Yeah. Forget the Bechdel test. That's what we need on this one.
Bechdel test too. So with that, I think, are there any major themes or any major plot points or beats that we missed? I feel like we've given it a pretty good hashing and given people a lot to think about.
The fun thing is if we were to watch it again, I bet we'd come up with other ones, you know? And I think, though, in terms of looking at, you know, you're where I was a year or so ago of...
Oh, before the rest of the books?
Well, yeah, in terms of, like, you watched the movie, then you read the book, and you went kind of like, okay, I'm going to watch this movie again. And now everything just has sort of different meaning or interpretation, or as you watch, there's a very different feeling to it, at least.
Absolutely.
And that to me was interesting because I really, I was looking forward to it. I was telling my wife last night that, I'm really looking forward to this because, he's where I was not that long ago. And it's interesting to me. Different people are going to get different things out of the film and the book. And how many different adaptations can you say that about? Where they've captured that in both media formats. So
I do think they're a fantastic pairing too. If you've only seen the movie or you've only read the book, you should absolutely indulge in the other piece. Because as a pair, they're even more interesting than they are alone.
My final question to you,
odd.
I guess, is do you still want to read the books?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'm very curious and to see. I want more of the world and the ideas, and I kind of want to... I like being thorough. I'm kind of a completionist, right? So if I start a series of things, I kind of want to finish them. George R. R. Martin pisses me off. So does Patrick Rothfuss. I will also call out Scott Lynch, The Gentleman Bastards. We need Thorns of Emberlane. Come on.
Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time. He didn't start that.
Jordan, Wheel of Time. Well, I will say, though, I'm really glad that Brandon Sanderson took it over because I think that there's like this penalty phase in the middle when Robert Jordan was at the end of holding shit together. And the book's kind of, there's like, it's like 9, 10, 11, 8, 9, 10 maybe. But there's like 3 books right in the middle where it's just so tedious. And then Brandon picks it up and he's got like a whole book that's one battle and it's amazing. Like,
the George R. R. Martin one is one of my favorites because he famously, he uses an old word processor and he needed help fixing it. And the guy he had fix it was Ty Frank. and Ty
Who's
Frank would end up pairing up with fantasy author Daniel Abraham, and the two of them became a new author named James S.A. Corey. And in the span between in the span before Winds of Winter, which we're still waiting on, but in the span between George R.R. Martin productions, all 9 Expanse books and novellas came out from James Corey, and the series finished completely. And that's one of my favorite things, is that, essentially somebody who got into it partially because of meeting people from George R.R. Martin working with him became another author, did an entire epic series, had a TV show based on their series, all between George R.R. Martin books. I love Martin. He owes us absolutely nothing. But if it would be nice. But and anybody that's listening to hear more about Annihilation, we're kind of past that now. We're talking about random stuff. So give us a minute and we'll wrap this up and let you go. But did you ever read the Wild Card series that Martin kind of put together and helped shepherd through? Yeah, I've read a bunch of his sort of side ones, not to mention stuff that his proteges have done. And that is largely because, I fell in love with Leviathan Wakes, the first book of the Expanse series. And so I ended up reading. And George R.R. Martin, he reminds me of one of the NFL football coaches. They talk about the Andy Reid.
In appearance, definitely.
Well, that too. But also, they talk about the Andy Reid tree, right? Sorry, I'm also a sports nerd. But they talk about the trees that grow from people, of proteges and offshoots and people that work with them or were inspired by them. And George R.R. Martin is a fascinating one, because beyond what he has given us in terms of literature and television and even film, beyond all of those things, man, there's so much work that's been inspired by, or so many people that worked with him that decided, you know what, I can write that book. Or, I'm not. I mentioned Ty Frank. Ty Frank was in his 40s, had never written anything, and just realized, you know what, I am going to write that book. And, he met Daniel Abraham. They hit it off. Daniel Abraham was already fairly successful with fantasy books. And it's an inspiring story. So that's why I say stuff that George R.R. Martin owes us absolutely nothing. If anything,
I agree, and neither do the others. Patrick doesn't, Scott doesn't. They don't owe us anything. I would just I'm hungry for more, and I will give them my money in exchange for their words.
But the old adage, and getting back to Annihilation and indeed the Southern Reach books, the old adage rings true of leave them wanting more. You'd rather that than. We did top 3, bottom 3 of The Simpsons.
Oh my goodness!
A while ago.
The bottom 3.
Surprise, surprise! The bottom 3 episodes were all from recent memory. You'd rather go out on top. You'd rather leave them wanting more than go away. Please never inhabit my screen again.
Yeah.
And
so with a go away call out, I think that's a pretty good spot to give you another shot to holler out about Up Nerd Podcast Network.
Yeah, so check us out. You can find us on upnerd.captivate.fm for the podcasts. We're on YouTube. We're regularly cranking out YouTube videos, going through the back catalog, which is interesting for me because we go through the stuff before I paid $600 to build XLR mics and get everything else in order. So I'm listening to it. We used to use AI and everything to touch up the sound, and I listen to it now and I go, oh boy, what was I doing back then? But anyway, no, we're slowly getting
learning
caught
process
up.
For us all.
Yeah, and we put up interviews and things instantly though, so there's more recent content up there on YouTube. But the podcast is up to date. We just, like I say, released another episode today.
I like how part of your sell is I listen to it and it's all over the place. You guys should listen to it too.
I'm nothing if not honest.
Fair. Self-effacing serves you. It suits you well, right? I'm Justin. You guys know me. You found me already. Like and subscribe anyway. We'll have more content for you coming up. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.